much. Thank you, all my panelists. Thank you for all the attendees that are here growing. Welcome back to the Free Market Roadshow, the digital edition. As you know, we were supposed to be in Rome in a few weeks from now, but something happened and we won't be there, but we already have been here in a digitalized format for the past 5 weeks, 6 weeks now. And today we are with a new seminar every Thursday. So be ready that from next week, we will have a new program coming. So stay up to date. And today we challenge one of the hottest topics right now. And of course, is not going to be China, as well as I know that most of you would like to talk about China and the WHO, but today we have something more exciting than that. And in a way, it has to do with China as well, and it's intellectual property. And the title of today's seminar is, Will the Health Crisis Erode Property Rights? And we have 3 great speakers that are also great friends, and particularly I would start with the order of the panelists. One is Lorenzo Montanari from the ATR and the Property Right Alliance, and then we have Richard Owens and Grant Robert. Richard and all the 3 are in America. Richard is in Canada. Meanwhile, Lorenzo and Robert are right now located in Washington, DC. Where is this coming from? Why are we talking about property rights and intellectual property? Well, because it's one of the core topics that we constantly discuss in our network. And because apparently before the COVID-19 exploded, but also now with the COVID-19, we see that there is a big threat for intellectual property. And there is a paradox, and allow me to say this, that most of our citizens, most of our governments are desperately seeking for a vaccine that should save all of us from this COVID-19, but at the same time, property rights are moreover and more than any time at risk or under a threat. So I'd like to stop here, but start with our great speakers because they certainly have better things to say than I have. And one is Lorenzo Montanari, and probably most of our followers know who Lorenzo Montanari is, and particularly where he comes from. He should be here with me in Italy, but he decided to move to the US, and he has decided to move and work for the American Protection Reform and to work for the Property Right Alliance. I will not go through the entire bio of Lorenzo, Richard, and Robert because they're very long, and I realize that it takes 5 minutes just to read them. And don't forget, our seminars last for 45 minutes. So we have 3 great speakers. So Lorenzo, we're talking about the property rights. I explained the reason, but there is a second reason. Sunday is the IP Day. Is it a day that we should celebrate, or is a day that is under threat?
Well, Pietro, thank you again for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to share this webinar with a great speaker like Richard and Robert and you. Thank you and congratulations also to you and Barbara for organizing the Free Market Roadshow and adapting the Free Market Roadshow to a virtual model. Yes, to answer, of course, we always have to celebrate intellectual property right, and the next Sunday, April 26th, will be a great opportunity to celebrate and to highlight why IP are important to spur innovation. But let me, I want to briefly, my presentation will be divided in 3 parts. The first one I will present briefly Property Right Alliance, our main flagship publication, the International Property Right Index. The second part will be about regarding the coalition letter celebrating the World IP Day. And the last one, I will try to briefly answer the question if IP are under threat during the COVID-19 time. So again, thank you. Just briefly, Property Right Alliance was founded in 2005 in Washington, DC, with the main goal to promote and defend property right, intellectual property right all over the world. We are proud to have a strong relationship and partnership with Hernando de Soto, the famous Peruvian economist that has been advocating for the protection of property right in the last 30 years. Thanks to his study, we developed in 2007 the International Property Right Index. And since then, we have been trying to promote, defend all over the world the value and importance supported with data about why property rights are a key element for economic growth. I want just to remind to everyone a lovely quote by Friedrich von Hayek that the system of private property is the most important guarantee of our freedom. So very briefly, the International Property Right Index can be found online, www.internationalpropertyrightsindex.org. So everything's online. Also, the data can be very easily downloaded, and you can play around with the data and check in your country. The professor, the author of the index, Professor Sara Levi-Carcente. She's a former dean of the economic department of the Central University of Venezuela, and she's been working with us since 2015. We had the pleasure to work with a huge network of more than 118 think tanks all over the world, covering more than 70 countries. And we are proud to work with you, Pietro, in Italy. You've been working with us since the beginning, promoting the index, with Barbara Coleman since the beginning as well. And most of you are also now listening, and we are part of the same network. So the index is divided in three main parts: the legal political environment, the physical property rights, and the intellectual property rights. We collect the data from different sources: the World Economic Forum, World Bank, doing business, for example, the IMF. We also use the patent index from Professor Park from American University, with which we signed recently an agreement of collaboration. I would say that this year, the average index is the average of the equal component among the three main items: the legal, political environment, physical property right, the intellectual property right. The scale goes from 0 to 10. The average score this year for 2019, for the previous edition, of course, we are already working on the new one, is a 5.7 for the general score. The best performing country is Finland, and the worst performing country is Venezuela, together with Haiti and Yemen. I would say that the top country are easily found in Northern Europe, again, Finland, Switzerland, but we can also always have Sweden, Norway. We have also some countries from Asia, New Zealand, Singapore, and so on. United States, Denmark, and Austria, and United Kingdom. The bottom, the 15 bottom countries are mainly focused, located in South America, Africa, and Asia, and the countries where basically there is no property right, or at least the situation, the protection is very, very low. Again, briefly, we divide our data by from different points of the economic development. And in terms of geographical region, the best performing region are, of course, North America, Oceania, and Northern European part, the western side of the European Union. Briefly, the relationship between property right protection and population, just to give an overview. 14% of population live in a country where the score is between 6.5 to 9.4. The average population is the 70% of our the population is live in a country where the average is between 4.5 to 6.4. And the bottom is 14% of the population live in a country where there is no protection of property rights. Every year we try to create different correlation between our index and other international index, and the stronger correlation in terms of economic outcome is with the Global Entrepreneurship Index. Same for what concerns the Corruption Perception Index. So country with a high level of corruption is country that have a low level of protection of property right. And also a strong correlation with the Global Biotech Innovation Index. And this is very important, especially to explain why IP are important to defeat coronavirus, any type of a virus, but also important to discover vaccine. Concluding regarding the index, I would say that the top country have a GDP per capita that is 16 times bigger than the bottom 20%. Another important data for policymakers to formulate public policy that are in favor of property right and IP. In general, from 2007 to 2018, we noticed that there has been an improvement in terms of protection of property right. The general score of our index see that there is an improvement by 8.85% since 2007, and this at least is a good trend. The strongest protection or the strongest improvement has happened in the physical property right, while for what concerns the intellectual property right, the improvement was since 2007 of 4.5%. There is still a big gap of intellectual property right protection between the Western, let's say Western world, I mean European Union, North America, and the rest. So 50% of gap with the rest of the world. Just to conclude regarding the index, at the end of our index, we always host different case studies. This year, we have the pleasure to host a case study prepared by Giacomo Bandini, that is also director of Competere, regarding the intellectual property right and China. In conclusion, our index has been used by different organizations, including World Bank, United Nations, magazine like Forbes, Financial Times, The Economist, and also private sector like Ernst & Young. We are happy to share the data behind the index with everyone needed, and basically everything can be found online.
Yes, Laurie, I interrupt you to stay in the time. I share the links to the Property Right Alliance and to the index right now on the chat. So for everybody that is connected, also from the on that are connecting through YouTube, don't forget, on YouTube you can follow us, but on Zoom you can make questions directly to our speakers. Lorenzo, and I come to Richard. Richard has an amazing law background. I'll read in a moment his bio. I'm coming to the question and then read your bio. Lorenzo said, there has been an improvement in the past years, but if I read some of the news concerning IP and pharmaceutical, there is this threat of the compulsory licensing. And it's not just a threat that is regarding some, developing countries or some countries that are in sort of not really a rule of law based government. I see it's also spreading around Western countries like Italy, for instance. The past government was very excited about this. Is it a threat that we should be concerned with? And Richard, I'm reading your incredible bio that is again posted on the Free Market Roadshow website. Richard Owens is a Senior Munk Fellow with Canadian's Macdonald-Laurier Institute, where he deals primarily with intellectual property and innovation policies, including pharmaceutical access and pricing. And he's also an adjunct professor teaching various courses regarding the law at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. The floor is yours, Richard. And thank you for joining us very much. Very happy to have you here.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here and to follow Lorenzo's terrific.
And you are in an office. Meanwhile, Lorenzo has the luckiness to be on the top of a mountain very high.
I can't share such scenery with you, alas. You're absolutely right. Compulsory licensing is one of the biggest threats right now to intellectual property. And, perhaps to the intellectual property system that we depend upon to help us overcome the virus. And it's actually one of the focuses of my presentation, so I'll just leap into it. My main question is, with a focus on healthcare research, what impacts do a pandemic turn out to have on the intellectual property system? And I'm going to assume for the moment that there's no intellectual property in the virus itself. We'll leave that aside. I think we're seeing two main intellectual property effects. And one of the most important, of course, is simply the tremendous incentive provided by intellectual property and the benefits of the research and manufacturing systems that our intellectual property system have given rise to. We've got more than 140 vaccines and therapies under investigation now. These are tremendously not only spurred by the intellectual property incentives, but also facilitated by the informational sharing that intellectual property facilitates. Then you've got more predatory impacts, and there's the modest side of this predation, and that's the compulsory licensing regimes introduced by countries to deal specifically with the pandemic emergency, where you have countries like Canada who have introduced very limited compulsory licensing provisions simply to ensure supply of pharmaceuticals during the anticipated period of the pandemic. In Canada, it actually sunsets in September, so it's really quite a limited provision. But you also see a much more opportunistic side to this predation, and that's, for instance, the United States Congress, the Democrats in Congress are pushing strongly in favor of a compulsory licensing law. And compulsory licensing really is not a particularly, frankly, sophisticated concept. It has to do with being able to confiscate, if you will, intellectual property rights to facilitate better bargaining if you want to buy a drug, completely obliterating the premise on which we develop drugs, which is that you get a patent to give certain pricing power as a compensation for the tremendous risk and investment required to create the drug in the first place. So we see this tendency towards undermining that system through compulsory licensing. We see it in the US, we see it in Chile, we see it in Italy, we see it in France. So yes, it's a real threat and it's growing. It seems that in times of crisis, private property rights come ever more under challenge. But I think that the moral basis for those rights, and indeed the incentive effects and the protections of freedom, as Lorenzo's quote from Hayek so nicely highlighted, these are even more important. You know, by way of example, we limit the ability to price private supply because of price gouging rules during a time of crisis. But when we think about it, you know, maybe there's some benefit in certain instances for public morale in showing that everybody is treated equally in pricing. But if there really are shortages, price signals are critical. And it is price signals which encourage supply, price signals which efficiently allocate existing resources, and price signals which discourage hoarding, which is critical too. So, you know, the smaller lesson there, I think, is property rights continue to be critically important, even in a time of crisis. And we must be very chary indeed of undermining the system on which our well-being relies. So the problem is, I think that system is being undermined. I think that it is very much at risk, partially from the issuance of compulsory licenses. Now, we've only seen one, to the best of my knowledge, compulsory license issued in the context of the pandemic. That was for a drug called Coletra. It was issued in Israel. But I think what we will see is there seems to be such willingness now amongst the industry to share manufacturing capacity that will be a much better means to address shortages than compulsory licenses, which would take the intellectual property of a supplier and provide it to some third party for manufacture. But more worrisome, I think, from the intellectual property perspective, are the curiously generous gestures that we're seeing from drug companies and medical device companies. By way of example, the most promising treatment now for the COVID-19 is probably Remdesivir, which is a Gilead Sciences product. Rather than taking this as a profit opportunity, Gilead Sciences has renounced certain intellectual property rights that it held in Remdesivir, and it said that it will make its entire supply of millions of doses available for free to the most symptomatic patients. Coletra, I mentioned that AbbVie's drug, Coletra, was the subject of a license in Israel. AbbVie has said it won't defend the patent rights in Coletra. Medtronic has made all its ventilator specs and patents available. Johnson & Johnson, perhaps the biggest player, has said if it comes up with a vaccine, as it may do, although vaccines are very doubtful for coronaviruses, but that's a different problem. Johnson & Johnson has said if it comes up with a vaccine, it will make it available on a not-for-profit basis. Wow. Why are they doing this? Well, you know, I think that these gestures by these large drug companies are surely an investment in political capital, but I think they also show the extent to which the morale of the industry is eroded by the continual attacks on intellectual property and the real fear that the opportunity to commercially exploit the remedies for the pandemic will be lost because of their potential expropriation or pricing limitations. So they're kind of meeting the disaster before it occurs. But, you know, these concessionary gestures may have very real impacts on the market overall. If Johnson & Johnson won't sell a product at a profit, what incentive does it have to acquire at a good evaluation the startups that it relies upon to do the research for that product? We may be, by dint of causing larger companies to abandon their intellectual property advantages, actually really stymieing and stultifying the entrepreneurial ecosystem we rely upon to give rise to drugs. It's almost a predatory pricing problem. If the market's going to be satisfied by somebody who won't charge a profit, then what's the incentive for capital to be available to invest in the startups that will generate the
Thanks, Richard. I have to interrupt you because, as you know, the webinar structure imposes us a precise time. It's like a football match. We have 45 minutes, and we notice that if we go over the 45 minutes, our supporters kind of turn to another team. Thank you, Richard. It's always beautiful to hear from you. It's so great, I have to say, to see you and Lorenzo and Richard and Robert for the first time. But it's so great to see you. And these seminars, I told Barbara a few times, some times ago, I said it's so nice also to do this seminar to see our friends that we would have loved to meet in Rome, but unfortunately we're not allowed. Let me briefly and quickly move to Robert Grant. Grant is Director of International Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and he's on the Chamber Global Innovation Policy Center. He's responsible for the center's engagement with international government and the Geneva-based multinational organization. With Robert, we would like to propose a more institutional approach to the issue of intellectual property rights and to the compulsory licensing, and giving your, let's say, Geneva experience also to provide that sort of perspective. With Lorenzo, we were more on the action side. With Richard, we covered the academical side. With you, we want to go inside on the institutional side. What is expecting us on intellectual property in the coming weeks? Is there going to be a new word also for intellectual property?
Thank you very much, Pietro.
Thanks, Robert.
And my fellow panelists. It's great to be here. Thank you very much to Barbara and all the other Free Market Roadshow colleagues for putting this together. It's an extremely important discussion, I think, in an extremely challenging time. It is important to try and unpack some of this. I think this is pretty complicated. There's a lot of terrible things happening that are corona related. So it's great to be able to have a sensible adult conversation about some of these things, despite the extremely challenging times. I think you know, Lorenzo and Richard have done a splendid job so far at explaining the importance of IP, property rights more generally. Love the Hayek quote from Lorenzo, and Richard, I think, has done a really nice job talking about the importance of intellectual property foundations for the biopharmaceutical industry. In terms of policy, I mean, I represent a number of US and international companies as part of the US Chamber's Global Innovation Policy Center. And you know, I think first and foremost, what we're really seeing is an absolutely enormous mobilization by business to tackle this dreadful disease, virus. And that's a hugely impressive thing to see. And the fact that business and governments are working so closely together, I think has got to be an enormously positive development. That really has and needs to continue. And you know, despite what Richard was saying, I have to say I am somewhat more sanguine about the outlook. So far, IP hasn't really been, outside of a few organizations who focus exclusively on IP, sometimes those that don't recognize the importance of a strong IP system to economic development. But I think those are the outlier. I mean, so many other organizations are really trying to focus on solutions, not just those from the IP intensive industries like biopharmaceuticals, but also, you know, publishers, manufacturers, and others are joining this, as I say, this enormous mobilization. And despite all the incredibly sad news that surrounds us day to day, I think it's important to be hopeful and point to these positive developments. So yes, as Richard said, some governments are beginning to think creatively about different ways to tackle the crisis. But undoing IP rights and removing IP protections has not really been at the forefront, at least so far. And I think that's partly testament to the fact that that governments are working very, very closely with business. As Richard said, you know, between about 140 and 170 different therapies and vaccines are currently in development, and this is because not because these companies are charitable organizations, nor is it because they started work just a few weeks ago. It's because of enormous investments of time and resource in R&D and other technical capabilities that actually a lot of these things are being able to be repurposed. And I think one of the things that we can expect once we get out of this current crisis is that those countries that are most likely to be able to bounce back effectively will be those that retain a lot of the protections that are currently in place. So that's what I would say really about business. In terms of policy and Geneva, you know, I don't think we should necessarily talk at length about the World Health Organization. The US Chamber has issued a statement suggesting that the World Health Organization does perform an extremely important role. But what is important is that business continues to work very, very closely with that organization so that it's not simply at the political whims of one or more members. I think it's heartening to see that Sir Andrew Whitty, who was the CEO of GlaxoSmithKline, the UK biopharmaceutical giant, that he has been charged with pulling together a task force of some kind to look at access issues. You know, compulsory licenses would really be a final option for some governments, but that presumes that, exactly as Richard was saying, that the companies are not working together to bolster supply chains, to increase manufacturing, and to try and provide access. Yes, a number of companies have already said that they will do their best to provide as wide access at a affordable price, which is a huge commitment, absolutely huge. But we are in a current crisis, and these companies are working extremely hard to try and provide solutions. More broadly, you know, some governments, including Costa Rica, have suggested that maybe there is a role for a patent pool. The patent pools, you know, particularly the medicines patent pool in Geneva, is a voluntary organization where companies provide the IP that they've generated, and typically it's for the least developed countries. You know, that's an interesting idea, and perhaps this is the sort of thing that where, in order to increase supplies, once we do get to effective therapies and vaccines, that might be a useful model for business to use. But equally, there might be lots of different ways of doing this, and the only way we're going to be able to come to an effective solution is through the extremely close cooperation between government and business. So I think perhaps
Robert, I have a question, and sorry to interrupt you. I'm also getting some questions here from my console here. From your privileged position, Robert, how do you think, as a network of think tanks, under the umbrella of course, of the free market here, Roadshow, but as a free market community, how do you think we could work toward a further strengthen of property rights, intellectual property rights particularly?
Yeah, you know, right now we live in a time of crisis with heightened political sensitivity. I think right now it's extremely important to be constructive and engaged, and not necessarily to fall back on traditional talking points. Yes, of course, IP is hugely important. Yes, of course, it leads to all sorts of economic development. It's a necessary but not sufficient part of a thriving innovation and creativity ecosystem. All of these things are true and won't change. But right now, these are extraordinary times and extraordinary circumstances. And so I think it's important to recognize that, and that governments are looking at options and opportunities that are untraditional. What we really need is constructive and a constructive dialogue, creative ideas. And I think that's the sort of thing actually that we are seeing all around the world. Unfortunately, some organizations are treating this crisis opportunistically and are pushing for solutions in their mind that are the sorts of things that they've always been pushing for. I think that's very unfortunate, and really not the sort of thing that that we as organizations that recognize the importance of IP and free markets and so on, we should try and avoid that, falling into that trap. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Yes, you did correctly. Thank you so much. Lorenzo, there is a question starting from you, and then I'll do we have 11 minutes to go. There's a question that was coming from Matteo Sabatini here. And the question is to elaborate more about the letter for the word, ahead of the word IP, if you can elaborate a bit more on that.
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question. Well, Property Right Alliance has been doing this advocacy activity during the World IP Day since we are existing, basically. And yes, the letter, we had the pleasure this year to run International Coalition Letter. We collect 93 signatures from a think tank organization representing more than 50 countries, and I really appreciate the support from you, Pietro, from Barbara, but I see also from, for example, Chile, Libertad Desarrollo signed the letter, a lot of organizations, South American think tanks. So it's a great commitment from the research organization think tank. The letter is an opportunity, as I was mentioning at the beginning, to state and highlight again why IP are important to defeat COVID-19. Without IP protection, we cannot have scientists or research institution racing to develop potential new vaccine and treatment for the COVID-19. So without going through the content of the letter that we addressed to the Director General, Francis Gehry, the Director of World Intellectual Property Organization, we highlight at least 5 key messages on the letter. Of course, the theme this year of the World IP Day is innovate for a green future. So of course, the first statement, we say that IP rights are green. The green innovation economy in the United States alone generate 1.3 trillion in annual sales revenue and employ nearly 9.5 million workers. We highlight the point that IP rights promote economic growth. IP rights inspire innovation across the sector. Intellectual property rights protect against counterfeit products, and also IP rights support trade. So this is the basic key message behind the International Coalition Letter. And again, I want to thank again all the 93 supporters, a lot of them from South America, Europe, Africa, Asia. And with them, we are looking forward to start promoting this letter with a strong, aggressive social media campaign on Sunday, April 26th. Why, if I can promote our webinar, if you allow me, on April 27 at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, we will have the policy webinar where there will be an opportunity to present officially the letter. We have the pleasure to host welcoming remarks and presentation from the WIPO director, Matt Bryan. We will have also Philip Thompson from Property Alliance presenting the content of the letter, Professor Mark Schultz from University of Akron School of Law, Professor Vladimir Maciel, Director for the Center for Economic Freedom, Brazil, and Jason Urbach, Director for Free Market Foundation in Africa. Brazil and Africa are going through a tough time also on IP, mainly South Africa. Just if I can just remind to everyone, in the last 1 year and a half, President Ramaphosa is trying to move forward to remove Article 25 from the South Africa Constitution. It's the only article where property right and IP are defended. And they want to implement policy on against copyright, IP in general, but also the infamous expropriation without compensation, the same type of policy that's been implemented in the 90s and destroyed.
Thank you, Lorenzo, very much. And please, guys, we are all invited to attend the seminar, and perhaps, Lorenzo, you can post the link or send around a further email. I know you we receive a lot of your emails that are always very meaningful. There is a beautiful comment and very thoughtful comment by Natalia Gonzalez from Chile that is posted in the chat, so please have a look to it. There's another question that's coming. I'll turn it to Richard together with a further question I got actually through WhatsApp. The point with webinars is that questions are coming from everywhere, from LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. It's becoming confusing. And guys, I'm getting old, so I have to get closer to the screen to to read. But Barbara noticed that today I have a tie, so thank you, Barbara, for noticing that. Next time I will wear a t-shirt, so you're happier. Frederick is asking, are there precedents to a situation like the one we are in, considering IP rights? And then let me allow to add another question that has come to my WhatsApp concerning the internet. Is the internet a way to threaten IP rights further than it's already happening?
Fabulous questions. So quickly, I'm not, the question of whether there's a precedent crisis, I actually don't know. It's something I want to look into, but I haven't. Often this kind of intervention where intellectual property rights are expropriated for the good of society occur in specific industries, nuclear being an obvious example, armaments being another, and there's often specific provisions in patent acts to deal with those industries. Ergo, I would anticipate that it's perhaps not public health emergencies that have given rise to these kinds of interventions in the past, but rather armed conflict. So if I were to look to see if compulsory licenses had issued and if and laws relating to compulsory licenses been used, I'd look to previous large conflicts to see if that had happened. The internet is we're focusing a lot on health, but the internet's been a really interesting issue. Again, talking about incentives. Intellectual property have allowed us all to almost seamlessly scale to work on a distributed basis going from our offices to home almost effortlessly. It's absolutely astounding. So I think the internet has proved the value of intellectual property rights in that way. On the other hand, you have entities like the Internet Archive that are using the cover of the pandemic to try to steal every known creative work to man. I mean, it's an astonishing grab of artists' rights. So in that way, I think we're seeing negative consequences to the internet, which has long actually laid siege to the rights of artists and content creators. So yeah, I think there's a very real threat there.
Thanks, thanks, Richard. Robert, I'm turning to you. I know in the Chamber of Commerce there are plenty of companies, not just pharmaceuticals, and there are also internet company. How is it possible to address this issue with some companies that in a way are contributing to, the theft of intellectual property? Because this is a never-ending discussion or even war with internet companies where actually, a fraud is happening.
Sure. Thank you very much for the great question, Pietro. So what I would say on that is that yeah, I think Richard's point about so many of these technology firms, creation of the internet, so much of this e-commerce has really led to an efflorescence of new creative works that people can access. I mean, right now during this crisis, yes, of course, so many of us are using Zoom and other software that has been created, and intellectual property has been a hugely essential part of how these came to be. We simply wouldn't have this kind of technological progress without property rights and various other incentives. And so streaming video and others, is a wonderful thing that so many is helping so many of us who are able to work be able to have a little bit of respite from some of the extraordinary and very, very sad developments that are going on. I don't know about the rest of you, but there's only so much news that one can take, and so I'm very, very glad for some of the creative music, video, and TV that so many small businesses and large have been creating. You make a very good point about the US Chamber of Commerce. We are the largest business federation in the world. That's a huge agglomeration of different companies, large and small, whether they are US HQ'd or international multinationals, a number of whom are Italian or European or Asian. In terms of counterfeit products, this is clearly and piracy. This is and has been an absolutely huge and hugely dangerous and damaging issue for, particularly, as you say, Richard, for creative content creators. That said, the internet has also provided huge amounts of opportunity for creators to get to customers and expand their brands and their market access. There's no easy solution to counterfeiting and piracy. Technology moves very, very quickly. Counterfeiters and pirates are often associated with illicit trade and criminal networks. There's huge amounts of capital behind them, and oftentimes there are websites or other technologies that seek to get around some of the other protections that the government's put in place. And within the chamber, yes, of course, we do have a number of e-commerce vendors, and I know that actually the US government recently has put forward some proposals for how to address some of the most egregious actions by pirates and counterfeit products. So we've been working very, very closely on our team with the US government to try and address some of these bad actors.
Thank you, Robert. Lorenzo, I started with you here at the end of our seminar here. Just a brief comment from you on the role of the internet, because with your property rights, and I know that the picture is behind you was taken directly by you and not downloaded by the internet. Is the Property Right Alliance addressing these issues? One of the next challenges?
Well, definitely yes. It's not our core issues since we are more focused on IP, but yes, we cover and we publish several case studies regarding internet privacy, GDPR, and so on. But definitely, we always see that is an interesting issue that has to be covered and tied to intellectual property right. But if I can, we'll just go back a little bit and mention something on compulsory license, just as to make comment. Following what Richard said before, we saw that there is a different country that have been trying to move forward on compulsory licensing. And we noticed that the compulsory licensing is an issue, is a bipartisan issue, is a problem because it's been moving forward, implemented by center-right, as well as sometimes center-left government. So I want just to highlight this point because, and most of the time this happens because there is a huge lack of education on the value of intellectual property right, how IP can spur innovation and therefore promote economic growth. I just want to highlight that as my closing remarks. We need to be working with both government. It doesn't matter the ideology, center left, center right. Most of the time, they still don't understand the value of IP and why are important for our health, for innovation, for our economic growth.
Thank you, Lorenzo. And you ended with the right words, and I think it's the work that both you, Richard, and Robert are certainly doing, but I guess the entire Free Market Roadshow community. Let me thank the three of you for taking your time. I know in the US it's early morning, so thank Lorenzo, thank Robert, thank Richard. I hope, as well as the many attendees that have been following the seminar, that we can continue our education work by also meeting each other, because it's very important. Every time I see in the list of people attending, some names I know, but many times I see people I don't know, and it would be great in real life to meet each other. And it's a great way to do education. But in the meanwhile, thank you so much for doing this here with us. Please keep doing it. The video was on YouTube, has been recorded, therefore will be posted on the Free Market Roadshow website. There is another seminar coming in a few minutes from now, exactly at, let me check here, at 4:30. There is the Free Market Roadshow Tallinn with creative destruction of the crisis, new opportunities for digital entrepreneurs, with John Kishon, Patrick Kayender, Odd Yaklas, and Melis Kissing. And there is the full list of next events posted on the Free Market Roadshow. Let me thank the entire team of the Austrian Economics and the Competere that allows us to put together this seminar, and everybody that has been attending, and particularly the three speakers that have been here with me today. And it was so great to hear you, but also so great to see you guys. Thank you so much. See you next time.
Well done, Pietro.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Well done.